I watched Trump's announcement at the White House today, so you don't have to, and here's my overview, and this one was wild. Here's the craziest thing he said. It's a direct quote when he's talking about the drug cartels. I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. You know, we're going to kill them. They're going to be like dead. Let's get into the meat of it. He spoke for about 70 minutes and mentioned Biden 14 separate times and Obama 3 different times. That puts his MBBs, or minutes between Bidens, at less than 5. We're going to have to power through this because a lot was said in 70 minutes, and if I make a part 2 for this, then history shows that you're not going to watch it. So he says 120,000 criminals have been arrested since he took office. He also said that Biden let the cartels take over our country and that they have caused more terrorism in our country than any other group that exists. He also says that Biden surrendered our entire country to the cartels. I don't remember that happening personally. He says we started losing wars after World War II when we became woke. He also says that there are beautiful black women all over the city of Chicago who are wearing MAGA hats because they want Space Force to come in, of all things. He also says that he was going to surge San Francisco. He doesn't explain what he means by surging the city, but apparently a bunch of business leaders asked him not to do it. And so he just decided that he's not going to do it. And then finally, he says that Portland is burning to the ground actively and it's full of insurrectionists. Next up, Pam Bondi spoke, and she said that no administration in the history of the United States has ever worked as well together as his administration, and that every single person in his administration is working 24/7 on the issues, even though they all refuse to negotiate on anything about the government shutdown. I wrote this in my notes, so she must have seemed really angry, but I wrote, why is she so mad? Like, she's in power. She is the attorney general, but she is very upset. She says that the project that they're working on, I guess the point of this whole meeting was to talk about criminals that they've gotten out, even though that's barely what they talk about the entire time. But she says that the project is the brainchild of Stephen Miller. So you know it's going to be some bigoted white nationalist BS. She also says that 3,200 gangs have been taken off the street. Not gang members, but gangs have been taken off the street. And finally, she's comparing the amount of drugs that they've seized to different objects because she can't just use sizes and have it make sense. And she says that all of the drugs that they've seized would fill up 4 separate semi-trucks, but also separately, all of the cocaine, just the powdered cocaine, would fill 1.5 swimming pools. She says a big swimming pool like in your backyard. She doesn't say like an Olympic-sized pool or anything like that. She's saying if you have a big swimming pool in your backyard, imagine it filled 1.5 times with cocaine, and that's how much cocaine powder they've taken off the streets. Next up is Kristi Noem. The only thing of interest she said is that since 2000, there have been 1 million people who have died of drug overdoses. Donald Trump later in the speech is going to say it's 300,000 every single year. She again has to say that so that when she goes on trial later, she can say, look, I wasn't being dishonest. It was him who was lying. Then the drunk comes up and he says literally nothing of import. I wrote in my notes, literally nothing of import. Then Tulsi Gabbard comes up and she says that they apparently arrested some cartel boss who was targeting pregnant women and then taking them and selling their organs and then selling their babies. No proof of that or anything. Next up is Nosferatu himself, Stephen Miller, and he says that no president has ever gone after the cartels in any way, shape, or form before, and also this country would be dead if Trump had not been elected. Next up is Trump, but just for a minute. He said, and you're never going to believe this, that we were a dead country a year ago and now we're the hottest country in the world. He also says that fixing potholes in DC is part of law and order. I don't know because he doesn't really explain anything about that. And then he says that the people in San Francisco, because he's not surging anymore, that he's going to let fix the issues in San Francisco. He says they're the biggest people in the world. He doesn't expand on that. Next up is Kash. He says that 200 million people would have died had they not seized the fentanyl that they seized. So I guess 2/3 of our entire population would have just drug overdosed had they not been out blowing up boats in the middle of the ocean or shit like that. He also the whole time kept, I don't know if you've ever done drugs before, but there are certain ones that'll make you do that a lot. And then he says the media should go out and talk to the lives that have been saved. And I wrote in my notes, I have no idea what the fuck that could possibly mean. How are they going to go out and talk to the lives that have been saved? Who? The 200 million people that aren't doing fentanyl now, I guess? Sorry about the cursing there. I try not to curse in these recap videos because I want it to be appealing to a wider audience. But again, I have no idea what the fuck that could possibly mean to say, go out and talk to the lives that have been saved. And finally, we have Todd Blanche, who says that it's disgusting that people don't want cops going out with masks on and no identification and kidnapping people in the middle of the streets. Now, he doesn't word it that way, but I would call that American to not want those things. He calls it disgusting. Next section I titled Trump Takes Questions. He says it's 5 months now, no one has entered the country illegally, which he says, of course, he doesn't believe, probably because it's a statistical impossibility. He also says that China is smuggling fentanyl now, not going through the Mexican border because they don't want to have to deal with that. But because of the fentanyl they're smuggling, he's now charging them additional tariffs. So they're making $100 billion a year by smuggling fentanyl into the United States, but they're paying in tariffs, which again is completely not true because a tariff is a tax on you. It's a tax on an imported good paid by the importer that is passed down to the American consumer. That is you who is paying the tariff. They're paying $120 billion in tariffs, so that now it's a bad business decision for them to smuggle fentanyl in and make $100 billion off of that when they have to pay $120 billion in tariffs because they're smuggling in fentanyl, which again is not true or how tariffs work at all. The next thing he says before we get into anyone else talking, he says he's never seen 5 engines on a boat before. So if there are 5 engines on a boat, it has to be smuggling drugs. I've seen plenty of boats, small boats with 4 engines on them. So I have no idea what he's talking about. He's just probably never been on a boat. He also says it's hard to find any floating vessel in either the Gulf of America or the Pacific. And he does talk about the Gulf of America because it goes on a long tirade about how that's the actual name. He also says that because of his naming of it, the Gulf of America, and the AP's refusal to watch that, they were barred from covering him at all. I watched the entire speech on the AP News' feed. He also says that they are sea drugs again today. He used to call them water drugs. Yesterday, he called them ocean drugs, sea drugs, and drugs by sea. Today, he called them sea drugs twice. And he also said he thinks, keyword there, he thinks the number of people who were killed due to overdoses last year was 300,000, which I did mention earlier in this recap. Then the drunk comes up and they ask him, hey, why don't you just arrest these people on the boats instead of, just blowing them to smithereens? And he says, because that's what we did in Afghanistan, of course. I have 3.5 minutes left, and the amount of notes that I have left on what Trump says alone is enough to cover a 10-minute video, so we're going to really have to go through this. He asked a female reporter where she's from. She has an accent. She was from France. I've mentioned that a bunch of times. He does it every single time a female reporter with an accent asks him a question. Some reporter says, hey, they were doing a vote on the West Bank in the Knesset just yesterday. Are you worried about that at all and how it has to do anything with your peace agreement? And he says, don't worry about the West Bank. Israel isn't going to do anything with the West Bank. He says that only after he explained multiple times that he couldn't understand what she was saying, even though it was very clear, and asked multiple other people in his cabinet to please answer the question because he couldn't understand what was being spoken in pretty clear English. He says Zohran's a communist, of course. He says that 11,843 murderers entered the country under Joe Biden's open borders and that more than half of them had committed multiple murders. Just last week, that number was 11,888. Welcome to the show where points don't matter and everything's made up. Caitlin Collins from CNN asked him a question, and he says, quote, you know nothing about nothing. You're fake news. He says that Democrats are being paid money to fight against Republicans when the only thing that Republicans are trying to do is stop crime. And then he says that the No Kings protest was full of paid agitators. I was there for free, just saying. He says that they found hundreds of thousands of children who were lost under Biden, which again is of course not true. And then he says that they would bring most of them home, but they're mostly either dead or slaves. He dropped his favorite trifecta when he says that Dems want open borders, men and women's sports, and transgender for everyone. This one almost got the craziest thing he said because I live in the state of Colorado, but he says that gangs took over multiple towns in Colorado and the weak, ineffective governor there just did nothing. I live here. No gangs took over any cities, I promise. He's asked if they should ban the apps that track ICE agents, and he says, I'm not really an app guy, so Pam can answer that. And then Pam's like, yeah, we totally want to. And then he says that ICE agents should wear masks because it's unsafe for them to not wear masks. He says the No Kings protest was embarrassing, that there weren't really any crowds out there. And then he says that the signs they all had were made professionally. So good job, anyone who made a good sign that Donald Trump thought was made professionally. He also said that the protests are a good thing and that he goes out and protests, which he doesn't. And then he says that we're going to be very surprised when we find out who was paying for the signs, because apparently they already know and they have all the information on who is paying for the signs. No, I didn't change my shirt back. It wasn't worth the effort to finish this video. He says he's very glad that Russia is saying that they're not going to be affected by any of the U.S. sanctions. And he also says that Democrats are only good at 2 things. That's cheating in elections and playing very dirty. Here's a direct quote. Adam Schiff is one of the lowest forms of scum I have ever dealt with in politics. He also says that Adam Schiff is a very sick person. He says he gave up his salary, which he didn't. He says he puts all of his money and additional money into the White House, and now it's gleaning, which it's not. It's lying in rubble on the ground. And he also says that he's taking care of inflation, and thank God for tariffs, because without tariffs, we'd be a third world country. He says he knows who came up with the word cartel, but he's just not going to tell us. He also says that Mexico is run by the cartels, but he very much respects the president. He says Jasmine Crockett is a very low IQ individual, and that of course we have $20 trillion in investment that's going to come in the US by the end of the year. He says Trump derangement syndrome will go down as an official diagnosis because doctors will make more money by treating it like a mental disease. And then he says that they've raised $350 million for the new ballroom, but it's only going to cost $300 million. It was $250 million last week. And finally, he says some random donor who he doesn't want to name gave $130 million in order to fund the military. That's $100 per service member, just so you know.